This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic.
And this is Matt Pegas.
And this is the comedy episode. We are, we're doing the New Right take on comedy here today. And crucially, we are both in New York City, the epicenter of comedy right now, aren't we?
Yes, we are live from New York, live from Brooklyn. I'm actually in Dan's living room right now, and Dan is in his room. And this is what we've determined will work best to record this very special episode of New Right.
This is the live from Dan's apartment episode.
This is live from New York, live from Dan's apartment, live from Brooklyn. I'll also just add, I mean, we're both a few absents in at this point. So again, it's this is an experiment, and we'll see where it goes. But we're talking about comedy, so it feels like a good episode to do in person. At the epicenter of comedy, New York. What were you calling it, Dan? The sewer? What was it?
Well, there's the Comedy Cellar is a famous. It's where Louis C.K. performed. It's a famous venue, and so I call this the Comedy Sewer episode, where we discuss the state of comedy today, which is in the sewer. And we, except for some notable exceptions who we are going to highlight, and then we discuss, ways to get out of the comedy sewer that is the place the industry finds itself today. And and indeed, with regard to the absinthe, this is, I think, the first episode we've done moderately fucked up. So
yeah, I think so. It's not the first podcast I've ever done under the influence, but it's the first I've done under the influence. And
it is the first you've done under the influence, or not?
The New Right episode I've done. I've done other podcasts with a little help from alcohol, but yeah, let's get into it.
So, the New Right take on comedy. Basically, comedy today is the prevailing establishment, woke, cathedral, whatever you want to call it, narrative, which all of the mainstream media industry has to buy into. It makes it very difficult for people to tell jokes, frankly, because a lot of the things that are or would be funny, which involve, say, differences between men and women, quote unquote racist jokes, jokes that, jokes about fat people, whatever, jokes about sluts. Like, this is this is the historic bread and butter of comedy. And, all of this is, basically off limits now. So, like, you have the comedy today of the Hannah Gatsby's of the world, the, it's kind of like a woke meta take on comedy, which is like anything but funny. It's funny that we have to endure it, but it's not actually funny. It's so like it's very difficult in today's day and age to have a Netflix special that's actually funny, because there's all of these topics that you can't speak honestly about, and you have to like toe the narrative line, which is essentially to repeat kind of saccharine lies. And it's you can't really be funny as a member of the cathedral, as a mainstream media institution. That is my proposition, and I think you generally agree with that, Matt.
Yeah, no, certainly with the idea that comedy is founded in honesty, that it's funny when there's at least a grain of truth. and that increasingly, you're not allowed to speak the truth in a mainstream media or mainstream entertainment context. Is certainly something I'm on board with. And there's famous cases that we're far from the first people to point this out. And crucially, someone like Jerry Seinfeld at a certain point in time, 2015, 2016. So before things were even as crazy as they are now, said he would no longer perform on college campuses due to the threat of people, walking out on him, finding him offensive. I think that you don't have to be a base red pillar to acknowledge that comedy is in a kind of degraded state, given the not merely the limitations on what people can say, but also just the politicization of everything. Everything has to have this political angle. The comedy, sorry, that's the
Yeah.
absence of talking. The
Yeah.
comedy comes secondary to one's allegiance to a certain political agenda, be that leftism proper, or be that just kind of basic bitch mainstream resistance liberalism. Um, especially during the Trump era, the politics became the primary thing. The comedy became secondary, and I think that is what has resulted in the sort of paltry offerings we have today in the realm of comedy. I mean, I haven't watched Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live used to be funny. I haven't watched in years. Seems like a cringe fest. So if you want to
Yeah.
talk about that kind of stand-up comedy and sketch comedy, that's in the toilet.
I
But yeah,
mean, like, I think a great example of that would be when they did the sketch with Kate McKinnon uh, as Hillary Clinton singing "Hallelujah" after the Leonard Cohen song "Hallelujah" after she lost, which was like a kind of mournful, like grievance, yes, but a like a dirge for the her failed presidential
right.
ambitions, which is like the antithesis of, well, no, it actually is quite funny. It's funny, but they didn't play it for humor. They played it for like the absolute travesty it is that the ultimate girl boss, Hillary Clinton, failed in her, attempt to, achieve the pinnacle of, Yas Queen. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and, that the fact that they, kind of played it so seriously actually is hilarious, but unintentionally so. And like,
Right.
I think that's a great example. Like, that's what Saturday Night Live has become. It's become, Kate McKinnon singing Hallelujah to, mourn the death of Hillary Clinton's political
Mm-hmm.
future. And so, like, it's become like Saturday Night Live is like, inarguably an arm of the Democratic Party, an arm of
Yeah.
the woke establishment narrative, and
Yeah.
basically what previously was the kind of creative class, the entertainment class, the wits, the satirists. They've all been drafted into the service of the gay American empire, and
Yeah.
they're soldiers of of the gay, and
Yes.
it's
Well, look, maybe they always sort of have been. I mean, you could always make the claim that the media and the entertainment industry has always been to the left, and that most of the people involved have been Democratic Party members and members of the cultural and political left. And yet, the issue isn't just merely their allegiance, but also the all-encompassing nature of what they're now doing, which is making all of the comedy about politics. I mean, the other example, more recent than Hillary Clinton's loss and the Hallelujah dirge. I get this via headlines. I don't watch Saturday Night Live, but there was like some kind of play on the song WAP, where it was rather than wet ass pussy, it was woman as president, and it was Paul Thomas Anderson's wife, whose name is escaping me. She was in Bridesmaids. She's a regular on SNL, and I guess the absent is obliterating this from my memory banks. Whatever this woman's name is, as Kamala Harris, and it was WAP and women as president. Anyway, the point being that these things have garb.
It's not Leslie Jones, is it?
No, it's not Leslie Jones. If you, I'm on my phone, you're on your computer. If you Google Paul Thomas Anderson's wife, it's a name that I'll be kidding. These sketches have. What's that?
Let's see. Paul Thomas Anderson's wife. This is a great podcast. As I'm Googling Paul Thomas Anderson's wife.
Well, I'll finish my thought in a moment. Yeah.
Maya Rudolph. There we go.
Maya Rudolph. There you go. As Kamala Harris. Anyway, these sketches have the trappings of comedy in that, it's someone dressed up as a presidential figure. It's a sort of, I guess you could call it a satire, a parody of a song. So they have the trappings of comedy. They come in that package. People are sort of triggered to laugh because it's someone dressed up as another person and there's a song being repurposed. But they're not comedy. They're political statements. The Hallelujah was a genuine dirge, as you said. The women as president thing, is also a genuine sentiment. It's not comedy. Yeah.
We often hear the left wears religion as a skin suit. That may be true, but they certainly wear comedy as a skin suit. This is not comedy. They've fucking killed comedy, and they wear its skin. And that's all that's left.
Yes. No, exactly. And we in our little notes, we were, in preparation for doing this episode, I laid a lot of the blame, in my opinion, at the feet of people who are not necessarily the absolute, crux of wokeness proper, but nevertheless, I think a lot of the blame can be applied to Jon Stewart and his progeny, like Stephen Colbert, and now Trevor Noah.
Yeah.
I think that these and Trevor Noah. But the osmosis or alchemy of politics into comedy or vice versa, I think a lot of the blame can be set at their feet. These were widely watched programs: The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, and now I guess what is Trevor Noah? It's still The Daily Show.
Daily Show.
Yeah, these are widely watched shows by kind of the normie libs of the world, and even a lot of the people who are further to the left still, maybe they got woke filled by these programs. They're widely watched, and their whole thing was doing a comedic shtick about the news, and they probably got a lot more viewers than the actual news for many years there. Basically, I think they were the ones who really made comedy political in the all-encompassing way it is now. Made comedy sort of a wing, made the sort of comedic establishment a wing of the Democratic Party, and vice versa. And I think that TV programming there is a lot of kind of how we came to be where we are with the state of mainstream comedy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And the silver lining of this is that the kind of woke establishment, by having all of these taboos around things that are they have made taboo pointing out the ridiculousness of the narratives that they hold, and this has created a condition, the environment for frankly someone who is going to poke holes in their narrative to have great comedic success. So essentially what they've done is create the environment for right-wing comedy. And the landscape today, it's barely even possible to do right-wing comedy. And like all authentic comedy, almost all, it has to be right-wing, because comedy is about, kind of poking holes and poking fun at the shibboleths of the establishment. And the establishment is left wing,
Right.
and also what they've done is they champion narratives that are absurd. So yes, the gender stuff, men and women are 100% equal. There's no difference between a man and a woman. And indeed, like the trans stuff, like, there's no such thing as a man or a woman. It's all, up to, whatever you want to, believe. And so there's also, and like, there are other, areas too, where they have, various kind of taboo beliefs, or beliefs about what would be taboo, to point out differences between, population groups and stuff of that nature. And, the fervency with which they hold these taboos, these beliefs that, to challenge would be a taboo, to challenge them means that, and the increasing absurdity of their positions. And they've twisted, contorted themselves into such, lies and, saccharine, kind of like absurdities, that like they've created a condition that is like absolutely ripe for comedy. They are like absolutely like, they're asking for it. And
Yes.
they are asking for it from, who are they asking for it from? Who's taking advantage of this? And I think we've discussed this in the notes. There's kind of like two schools right now that are actually funny, that are doing funny shit, and are taking advantage of this moment. And I'm going to suggest the one we described first is the dirtbag left school, that kind of pokes fun at these things, while kind of like ultimately the reader or the audience knows that their allegiance is with the left, so they get a pass. So it's the school of non-ironic sexism, non-ironic racism, non-ironic bigotry. And no one is a better exemplar of this than Nick Mullen of Come Town.
Mm-hmm.
And he is probably, in my opinion, the funniest person alive today. And he's like what he gets away with saying is like he had a bit like the alt-right Homer Simpson. The funniest thing I've heard in the past like 5 years, at least, maybe ever. And it's just like he is so willing to say what's actually like true about just like has no respect for the taboos or shibboleths of today. And he gets away with it because people know that like ultimately he does respect it, because if our audience doesn't know, Nick Mullen and Come Town is his podcast. They are basically members of the DSA and are leftists and like etc. So they because they have the badge, they get to make the jokes.
Yeah. No, exactly. Well, that's another thing. I mean, a lot of the funniest comedians, well, this is another topic within this broader topic, but obviously, a lot of Jewish comedians can get by with a little more comedy-wise, and like just generally speaking, a lot of if you're not a straight white Christian, totally like male, you can get by with a little more. But one way is also, if you're like a card carrying socialist, it helps these little ways of qualifying are how a lot of people sort of get the funnier comedy, past the goalpost, so to speak. And as you said, I think Nick Mullen's a
Absolutely.
good example of that being, and honestly, the dirtbag left in general, not just with regard to comedy, but with regard to everything they say. That's kind of the whole shtick in a way of the dirtbag left is, oh, of course we're socialists, we're the real leftists, in fact, but also Camille Paglia was right, or also maybe there's something to some of the stuff these alt-right people are saying, or maybe there's some in the case of like an Anna Khachiyan, maybe there's something to BAP and to Welbeck. It's this
Well,
magnificent sort of
I would
Trojan horse.
differentiate Red Scare and Anna from like Nick and Come Town in the sense that like I wouldn't say that Anna and Red Scare are like like relying on like ultimately, oh, I'm a leftist, because they get shit, they get heat
Yeah.
because they're not leftists. Like
They're not totally reliant upon it, but I do think it's how they kind of broke through a little bit to a more mainstream audience than any of us, straight white males on
well, I mean, I
the real
think part of
dissident, right?
the
Yeah, go
reason
on.
why they broke through is because they're attractive women, and like that ultimately will get you pretty far.
Yeah. So it's a bit,
Whereas
yeah, for sure, 100%. I
like
mean, it's
Nick
yeah,
couldn't be Nick Mullen couldn't be Nick Mullen if he didn't say that he's like a leftist, because
true.
if Nick Mullen wasn't a leftist, he would be the next guy we're going to talk about, Sam Hyde. So Sam Hyde, why don't you take it away, Matt? What do we have to say about Sam Hyde?
Well, I think the note you'd made earlier is that Nick Mullen is funny because he pretends to be racist, and Sam Hyde is funny because he actually is racist. Not to be too simplistic about it. I mean, the thing they used to say about Sam Hyde and Million Dollar Extreme back when the show was first done in 2016 was that it was post ironic, which is one of these kind of cringe academic terms that basically means you can't the distinction between sincerity and insincerity, sincerity and irony is blurred to the point where it doesn't really matter. And that's not really the point of the comedy. The point is just kind of the presentation or the spectacle itself. And, I mean, what can we say about MDE and Sam Hyde that hasn't already been said? It's hilarious. There's just a few episodes out, totaling not much more, I think, than an hour of content. If we're talking about the Cartoon Network, the Adult Swim special that aired in 2016, obviously there you can find more Million Dollar Extreme material that had been made before and that has been made since, and much of it is also quite funny. But it was this breakthrough moment where Frog Twitter and the alt right of that time influenced a not mainstream per se, but an aired television show that was able, I guess you could say, kind of wrote between the lines in some sense, to refer back to a sort of new right theme that we bring up again and again about the idea of writing between the lines and sort of disguising what you really believe with the level of plausible deniability. With Million Dollar Extreme, it was the idea of post irony. To go back to that, it was never quite clear what exactly they were trying to convey, but what was clear was that they were, breaking taboos left and right for their own sake. And unlike Nick Mullen, where it's breaking those taboos, but within the framework of what we're all actually socialists and leftists at the end of the day, with Million Dollar Extreme, I think it was unclear what the perspective of Sam Hyde actually was. And I think it eventually became clear that even if he wasn't as sort of anti-Semitic or as far right as some of the sketches may have conveyed, that he was at least a Trump supporter. He was an open Trump supporter in 2016. And that's why it didn't last too long. Cumtown is still with us, I believe. I'm not a regular listener,
Yeah,
but
it
it's still
is.
with us. Whilst MDE was, some people say it was one of the first real casualties of Trump's victory. It was basically canceled later that November of 2016, and it's because so what Sam Hyde was doing on Cartoon Network is just not something you can do, not something that's permitted, which is being a straight white male and an open right winger, shall we say, and also being funny is not allowed, and it's a kind of a success enough and funny enough that he got one past the goalie in the first place.
Yeah.
And the content that was produced was great, but yeah, basically just to return that idea, Nick Mullen is funny because he pretends to be racist. Sam Hyde is funny because he actually kind of is.
Which actually makes Sam Hyde funny. And ultimately, though Mullen is funny, the fact that he kind of, every joke he tells, it's kind of like, but you don't really believe that, but you do really believe. It's just so muddied in like, various levels of kind of safety checking and like, various levels of kind of subterfuge of some sort. It, to me, undercuts the comedy of it. Whereas like the kind of, obviously, and I certainly don't agree with everything that Sam Hyde says. And yes, he is a comedian, so it has to be taken with a grain of salt, but he's certainly not a member of the DSA. So when he says stuff that is like very biting, yeah, you kind of like, that you know, there's no kind of like doubting that it's what he really means in the same way there is with Mullen when it's like, well, you can't be a member of the DSA and believe these things. So like Sam Hyde's jokes punch harder. And that in some ways makes him a more like honest and brave comedian and a better comedian. And that is something that, in this day and age means he's going to be a less successful comedian and not, not making as much money and certainly not have as many outlets. Like Mullen is, probably making something like $500 to $1 million a year just off his podcast alone. And
yeah, so
like,
I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that like I know that Hyde currently has like somehow he has a YouTube show. I hope that he doesn't get
Yeah.
canceled, but
I don't think he's on YouTube. I think you kind of have to go to their personal website. Unfortunately, I think he probably would have gotten kicked off of YouTube. But no, he's still making videos. He's on Instagram. He's on Twitter actually, despite having been banned. Yeah, Twitter.com @Wigger. That's what you have to look up.
Huh.
At WIGGER. That's Sam Hyde.
That's his handle, Wigger?
That's his handle. Yeah, I believe he paid a good chunk of money to get that. But
I mean, that's funny. Like that's funny right there.
Yeah, it is funny. I don't know if someone else must have had that handle. I don't know what he did to get that handle, but that's where he's at. He's not too active on Twitter. He's surprisingly active on Instagram, I would say. His comedy is around, but it's not very public facing. Like you have to kind of seek it out, and it is still funny. It's him. It's still not just Sam Hyde either. By the way, he has a whole $1 million Extreme brand and other people he makes videos with. Though I don't know if they're the same videos he made that he made the original Adult Swim series with. I don't know if it's something we want to get into on this podcast, but some of his co-comedians on the original $1 Million Extreme have gone on to do some interesting things as well.
I mean, yeah, Frank Hassel, we were talking about. He like keeping with like Sam Hyde's kind of like dangerous opinions, like he's literally doing dangerous comedy in that he's like, I think he's been arrested approaching people and like doing a like his Frank Hassel, and so he does a like a real life hassle where he's a jerk to people on camera in real life. And yeah, it's just like I've like fallen down like a rabbit hole watching his stuff one night, and like, like an hour goes by, like nothing, because it's fascinating to watch someone, harass random people. And like, yeah, I don't agree with what he's doing. Like that's kind of fucked up, but it is funny. And that's something like humor. Yeah, it's not something that you're gonna feel good about all the time. Humor is fucked up sometimes,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah, yeah.
something that you can't really, you know, that's the thing about like the jester, the like the court jester. He was someone who like could tell the truth because he was beneath contempt. And someone who's a
Hmm.
comedian, in some sense, can't also be someone who's a card carrying member of the establishment, because you
Yes.
have to be beneath contempt to tell the truth. And that is what Sam Hyde is. That is what Frank Hassel is. Like all of these people who are just like the mainstream, the establishment, they would call them scum. And that's why they're able to tell the truth, and that's why they're funny. And
Yeah.
like real like mainstream comedy, SNL is just wearing the skin suit of comedy. It's not actually like, it's not anywhere near the embodiment of the court jester that comedy actually is. And someone like Nick Mullen, he's somewhere in between. He's wearing a skin suit of sorts. He's a member of the establishment. Not really, but like he's not going to get you know blackballed from the, because far from it. He has like successful comedy tours. Like he is touching the third rail. He's telling the truths that that really only the jester, the one who's beneath contempt, gets to tell. But he doesn't want to be beneath contempt. He and the other guys on Come Town, they want to be part of the kind of clique of cool kids who are accepted by the, if not the establishment, by the cool version of the establishment. And like they
Right.
have like successful lives. They have like
Hmm.
Adam Freeland. He dated Dasha Nekrasova, who's like Dasha of Red Scare, like every incel stream girl. And like they're like actually successful people in real life. I don't
Yeah.
know if you can, in this environment or in any environment, be a successful person and a comedian. If you're a comedian,
Yeah.
it means you have to be able to, you know, be so like kind out, so far out of the mainstream, so far out of the game where you have status and you can, leverage it, that you are so free because you are risking nothing, because you have nothing. You are so free to say anything. And that is the space that real comedy needs to operate from. So when you hear Sam Hyde, you watch his stand up or something, it's clear that he's like you know, a man outside, a man
Hmm.
who's like not tied to any sort of like any sort of standard at all. And I mean, and that is like both funny and wild. And that's
Yeah.
what you want to see when you see comedy. You want to see wild wilderness. You want to see the wilderness in man.
Yeah. Yeah. At the most, at the best comedy, obviously, there's always going to be stupid comedy that doesn't hit that stride. But yes, no, I agree. And I mean, that's what you said a moment ago. I mean, that's, I guess, the most negative interpretation of certain people within the so-called dirtbag left, is it's people who want to kind of have their cake and eat it too. It's what Bronze Age pervert accused as quote unquote face fags of being, as people who want to grab the energy of, the frogs, for lack of a better word, want to tap into that dissident energy, tap into that barrier breaking energy, that shibboleth flouting energy, but want to use it to just be another cool kid. I mean, I don't think that applies to by far. I don't think it applies to everyone in the dirtbag left, but that is like the worst blush interpretation of what some, not just dirtbag left presenters and people who are actually making those podcasts, but also your average. And there's probably a lot of them here in Brooklyn. People who are, they're not, they know that resist libs are cringe, and they know that wokeness is overdone and cringe, but they're not willing to really swallow the hard pills and actually delve into views that would make them, outsiders.
Yeah.
Which is what, on the other hand, people like Sam Hyde are willing to do. And it's not just Sam Hyde. He's not just our golden boy, one example of a comedian. We were talking earlier, the whole thing of Our Corner of Twitter, of Frog Twitter, a lot of it is comedy. There's politics, which is often serious, and there's serious kind of big brain considerations of this, that, and the other thing. But half the tweets you see, if I'm just scrolling through my timeline, are people trying to be funny.
Yeah.
And you've highlighted Howling Mutant as a great comedic account. I could name a dozen others. I like a lot of the people associated with Jack's podcast, The Perfume Nationalists, whether it's Brendan Lusso, FKA Gorgonzola Man, or Blauergeist is funny sometimes. Like, comedy is Jokes department. Yeah, it's absolutely integral to what we do on Our Corner of Twitter is this kind of comedy, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's anon, like, not like, yes, like Howling Mutant and Jugs, they're anon. Like, we don't know who they actually are, though. Like, we would love to have them on the pod, but
Yes.
that's a little missive out there. But yeah, it's even beyond the actual like anon accounts, just like true 4chan wild energy, like memes going back and forth. Like, this is kind of like a generative environment, Frog Twitter, where you have like the kind of like jokes and comedy that's coming out of here, just like some random kid who like throws a meme together. Like, you don't really have this on the other side, because for the reasons that we've stated, you can't. Because, like, well, what are they going to make fun of? They're going to, because the establishment is left. So you're going to essentially, if you're on the other side of the aisle and you're making fun of the right, you're really just punching down. And that's not really, that can be funny, but it's not really funny in the way they do it often. Like, it would be like, it's so like clearly like motivated. I'm thinking of like kind of like tanky left humor, or like, certainly Reddit left humor, but like, yeah, and certainly like resistance lib humor. It's all like very very, I'm not going to say pedantic, very sermonizing. It's like so clearly
it's moralistic.
Moralistic.
It often is pedantic. It often is. It's meant to teach you a lesson, and it's the idea. Bret Easton Ellis talks about how movies have died because ideology came before aesthetics. Well, comedy's a sub branch of that, where ideology comes before the aesthetics, but it's the ideology coming before the humor.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
No, two things what you said that ring very true. I mean, one, yes, Our Corner of the Internet, the meme culture of it all, the 4chan energy of it all, again, it's very integral to what this whole thing is. And then B, on the subject of, punching down, I mean, I had some interesting thoughts on that earlier. Yeah, I mean, the comedy that you see now, where it's, SNL and other outlets are part and parcel of the mainstream and part and parcel of the the center left mainstream and the Democratic Party. Absolutely what they're doing is punching down. They're making fun of people who have significantly compared to them, have no cultural power. They have everything, and Red America has nothing in terms of cultural power. But even in terms of wealth, there's some out and out sort of making fun of blue collar, white, straight male Americans, and just really, I mean, there's very few metrics of power in which it's not a case of people punching down.
Yeah.
But crucially, they don't see it that way because, a lot of their influences, they're used to the comedic culture that came out of the 80s and the 90s where there still was a moral majority, where conservatives, I mean,
Absolutely.
look, comedy has always been left wing. The mainstream media has always been left wing. The whole pretty much kit and caboodle of the United States and of the powers that be has always kind of veered to the left. But post Reagan and everything, there was a moral majority. There were people, in positions of power who were right wing. Obviously during the George W. Bush administration, a certain kind of Republican was ostensibly in power. So they're still in the mentality where they don't think they're punching down. They think they're punching up. They think that, in fact, very much the self-regard of these people is very, evidently, and they'll even say this verbatim, that they are speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
And doing so in a stunningly brave manner. That's their
Stunningly.
self-regard. Yeah. And even when they know they're sort of punching down, their images of themselves is kind of like, you remember this very cringe, I don't think it was a Netflix original movie that came out, I believe, last year called Prom, involving, I don't even know their names off the top of their head. Was Meryl Streep involved? Maybe, I don't know. A bunch of different Hollywood celebrities acting out this real world story of
based on the musical play, The Prom.
Is it based off of a musical? There you go.
I believe
They went
so.
to some town and they took some, I guess, lesbian or gay kid to prom who had previously been barred. I don't even know the story, but my point is
that's the story. That it was like a lesbian girl who couldn't take her girlfriend to prom because and it was I think set in the 90s or something, because that's not even true today. There's no town in America where you can't take your girlfriend to prom today.
There you go. I mean, that's their self-image.
Their self-image is the culture wars of the 80s and 90s, which they won, and they keep going back to it because they need to be the underdog when in fact they're the stormtroopers.
Exactly, the stormtroopers rushing into Red America, and they think they're doing something noble and heroic, but they're actually practicing a form of, I guess, imperialism, you'd call it. And that's evident to a lot of us. But again, their self-regard is very diluted, and they still think of themselves as speaking truth to power and rescuing those in need. And I don't know. There's still parts of America where maybe it is hard to grow up gay or whatever. But for the most part, the image that they are punching down is much, even if it's not in and of itself totally true in all cases at all times, it's much closer to truth than their self-image of speaking truth to power and
Absolutely.
helping those in need.
Yeah. They are stuck in they're a casualty of their own victories, and they it's really hard to be the kind of witty provocative underdog when you control everything. And so they've ceded comedy to the right by virtue of winning, and it's sorry, that's ours now. You gave it up by winning. And it's I mean, also what is more hilarious, even as you describe it, kind of like liberal white women like rushing to a red state to help like some lesbian bring her girlfriend to prom. It's hilarious. And like that is like they've become ridiculous
Yeah.
and it's funny. And so I mean they've everything in culture today, as fucked up as it is, has set the stage for brilliant right wing comedy. And the problem
Hmm.
is we don't have enough of it. The problem is because, like, like Frog Twitter is great and it's very generative and there's a ton. I mean, like, I don't know if we've had anything like Frog Twitter in our history, frankly.
No.
But in terms of like an actual individual, like we've talked about Sam Hyde and another Frank Hassel, another guy associated with $1 Million Extreme. I don't even really know anyone else to talk about. And that's
Yeah.
kind of screwed up. Like, there's so much, it's so possible to be hilarious today from the right. The problem is that anyone who is will have to either, of necessity, be anonymous or just like, not care about his ability to put food on the table, like Sam Hyde,
Hmm.
and just, roll the dice. And so that creates an environment that is like, yes, it is kind of like it's conducive to the best kind of comedy, but it's rare that someone is going to really like reach for that ring because if you actually grab the ring, you lose, you lose the food, you lose the
Right.
job.
Right. I mean, what you end up having is, in the best case scenario, you have a lot of very middling examples, most of whom have been more or less grandfathered into the position where they can have a voice at all. I'm thinking, of course, of Dave Chappelle, who I'd be remiss not to mention after all the controversy surrounding him these past couple months. And then you also have people like Ricky Gervais, who now does this podcast with Sam Harris. I'd put Louis C.K. in this category. He's maybe one of the better examples because he has, in my opinion, C.K. is great, has always been hilarious, and has continued to be hilarious after his, cancellation for probably genuine perversion. But we classified this group earlier as sort of like the IDW of comedy in the sense that they're broadly speaking on the right side. They're not woke. They're not. They recognize the excesses of modern liberalism and modern leftism, and so have the ability to be sort of funny. I think Ricky Gervais's Oscar speech from a couple of years back was pretty good. I mean, I like it more on a political level. I'm not sure how I wasn't exactly slapping my knee, but he made some good points. So these are the sort of they're an exception to the general decline is some of these older people who've sort of been grandfathered and have a platform on Netflix or elsewhere where they can push back on the left mainstream a bit, but they can only go so far. They certainly don't go remotely as far as Sam Hyde, and they found this IDW analogous sort of middle ground where they can make their points, lose some fans, gain a lot of others, be controversial, but not get totally deplatformed, basically.
Exactly. The IDW of comedy mirrors the actual IDW in that they
Yeah, and indeed, just to
accept
point it out, go on, sorry.
they accept all of the premises that lead people to red pilled conclusions. I'm not going to get too much more specific just because, but they accept all of these premises that lead to the red pill beliefs, but they don't go there. They just they kind
Right.
of accept the premises, and so they kind of like they tease it up, but they don't deliver. And they're never going to really be that funny. Dave Chappelle's never really going to be that funny. Ricky Gervais is never really going to be that funny because they notice like, oh, look at that. That's hypocritical. That's that's silly. That's this. That's that. But they won't actually say, well, okay, given all of that, then what's the next step? And like
Mm-hmm.
Sam Hyde will take the next step. And like
Right.
Nick Mullen will too. And Nick Mullen gets away with it because like when he tells like, an anti, a racist joke or whatever, he turns around and he's like, "Oh, I'm a leftist," and he has
Yeah.
his get out of jail free
Exactly.
card. But so
Yeah.
crucially, these IDW comedians, Chappelle, Ricky Gervais, like I don't know, like some people would classify Bill Burr as this. Like it's kind of like funny, but ultimately they're cucks. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is like, that's kind of like, it's a, I appreciate it as someone who's like a little bit red pilled. I appreciate watching this, certainly more so than like, SNL. But, it doesn't really deliver the laughs because they're not they're they're cocked they're
Yeah.
lukewarm, and you watch comedy, you want something that's hot, you want something that's going to
Exactly.
burn. And
Yeah.
certainly Chappelle's like, yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally on board with this perverse atrocity. It's like,
Yeah.
well, like, okay, like, cool, you're not on board with it. That's interesting. But well, so what's next step? And like, yeah, Sam Hyde will say what the next thing is, and that's funny. But like, I appreciate IDW attempts at humor, but I'm not really
Right.
laughing.
Exactly. I mean, it's analogous to IDW itself. I think there's plenty of value there, and there's a lot of potential for people to, be drawn into more interesting conclusions, starting with IDW types, but it just doesn't go far enough. But yeah, no, I was just also going to hammer the point that like the IDW comparison is definitely apt because, I mean, Gervais, as I think I said earlier, has a podcast with Tim Harris, and I don't remember exactly, but during the Chappelle of it all, the IDW kind of came out of the woodwork to defend him. Um, even some better examples of IDW people like Joe Rogan, will platform these people. It's it's a network of people who exist in this semi-acceptable space, and more power to them. I think they do a lot of good work, but they're not exactly like the epitome of like what we're looking for.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I think that's probably a good note to wrap it up on.
Yeah, I think we can just about wrap it up. I mean, I guess the one other point I want to say about that whole notion of the SNL mainstream comedy crowd sort of punching down. I think you sort of hit this, but I want to make sure we hit the point. I mean,
Yeah.
the point is that that's not funny. It's not funny when you're in a position of power to say something where there's no risk, where you're saying something that everyone is going to be on the exact same page, where all the relevant powers that be are going to be on the exact same page as you and praise you for it. Nothing's at stake there, and it's not funny. And the type of comedy that that we hear on New Right is where there are stakes and where you can get in trouble for doing it, and where it does make novel points. And maybe sometimes you have to sort of write between the lines and get creative that way, and that can be pretty funny too. But the comedy scene right now is thinly veiled, punching down, and it fucking sucks. And I think that would be my last word on the matter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like rooting for like Goldman Sachs to make another $1 billion. Like,
Exactly.
you know, it's a pretty good bet that it's gonna happen, and it's not that funny. So
Yep. 100%.
on that note,
This
this
is this is Matt and Dan signing off from live from New York.
from New Right headquarters.
From New Right headquarters here in Brooklyn.